Hi everybody, Richard Tromans here again at Artificial Lawyer TV. Today we're doing another product walkthrough. This time it's with V7, and to tell us a bit more about what the company does is Patrick. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what V7 does, and then we'll get into the product side.
Sure. Thanks, Richard. So I'm Patrick. I'm a solutions engineer here at V7. I work with customers both pre and post sale on developing solutions with our AI document processing pipeline or tool called V7 Go. V7 as a company has been around for 6 years, but we've recently launched our document processing project. It's been around for about a year, and it's called V7 Go, and it enables teams across finance, insurance, and legal, we'll be talking about today, to automate a lot of the document processing, the manual processing pipelines that they've been doing currently. It enables teams to do that sort of processing at scale using the latest artificial intelligence.
Great, Patrick. Thank you for that introduction. If you'd like to give us a bit of a walkthrough now, I'll disappear and come back at the end.
Thanks, Richard. So for today's scenario, we've got a hypothetical legal scenario where one property company in the UK is trying to acquire a smaller property company in the UK, and a legal team has been tasked with doing due diligence on company B in this case, doing due diligence on all of their existing leases. They have thousands of leases from properties across the UK, and the company doing the acquisition essentially wants to check whether all of the leases in property B's portfolio are compliant with UK law. Now, as we would work through with the customer of how to solve this problem, we've generally split it up into 4 steps. And you'll see that some of the steps are automated with GenAI to hopefully get you to a point where you're sort of 90% there. All of the data is ready for you to do your analysis. But the final part at the end, that is what your legal teams, that's their expertise in terms of making the final set of decisions and recommendations to the client. So breaking down those 4 steps, we have the first step, which is just a sort of raw data extraction. It's extracting key points from the leases, such as the term length, whether it's due to expire, things like EPC ratings, as well as a set of like pertinent clauses that we're interested in to check their sort of compliance against UK regulation. The second step, once we've done those extractions, is to cross-reference any of the extracted clauses. So things like alienation clauses or termination clauses, to cross-reference those clauses that we've extracted against existing UK law, which we'll show you how we'll do it in Go, just to check whether everything is compliant and up to scratch. And importantly, highlight any leases that aren't compliant that obviously would maybe affect the acquisition. The final 2 steps of this process is sort of where the legal team comes in and where their own particular expertise comes in. And that's the sort of analysis step and the sort of recommendation step at the end, where hopefully we as V7 or the customer using V7 has extracted all of the pertinent and important information, the things that might take 90% of their time. They've done all of that. They've automated it and Go. That's enabled them to spend more time on those sort of higher value recommendation sort of parts of the deal at the end. So once again, to break down those 2 steps a little bit further of what we'll actually be showing in Go, the first step, as I said before, is data extraction. So we have those key points that we mentioned earlier. We'll be taking documents. I think we've got a sample of 30 documents, but obviously Go can, process thousands at a time. We'll do a simple set of extractions there. We'll show how simple that is to do in Go for a non-technical user. And then from there, we'll do sort of some more advanced features within Go and show you how you can do things like extracting clauses, then cross-reference them against these 2 sets of legislation to determine if the particular clause is compliant or not. Finally, we'll then show you how how the user can export all of that data into something like an Excel spreadsheet, and then use that for their downstream analysis.
My name is Will, and I'm the lead for the legal tech sales team here at V7. So what I want to do today is kind of talk through the actual product in a bit more detail. Here, we have basically a fully populated matrix, which gives us all the information that we actually would perhaps populate into our report. So you can see some of the things here that we've got are, various EPC ratings, service charges, rent, tenants, etc. Obviously, this is kind of a pre-populated example, but it shows, what a sample output might look like after we've constructed a workflow. The aim of today, though, is to just talk through perhaps how you can get to this state and how quickly you can get to this state. One of the, I guess, assessment, aims when anyone is looking at a piece of technology has to be how much better is this than just a manual process? And if we imagine looking at one of these lease, contracts, that to get all that information out might take 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes. If, you have 1,000 of those, that's 160 hours. And if we can kind of try and get that down to less than an hour, we're making big progress. If it's half an hour, even better. So this is a kind of only semi-populated example here where I'm just going to talk through what Go actually is, how it works, and how we can start to build on those principles. So each column in V7 is either something that you populate as a user or something that an AI generates as an agent. So in the first column here, we have the lease agreements, and you can see these in the platform. There's just various lease agreements that we've populated into the platform, designed to represent, some of the leases that company B would have on their books prior to the acquisition. The second column here is the first AI populated column that we have, and it's very, very simple to set up these extractions. So the first thing I do is select the type, the output type, in this case, text. I select the tool from, a various list of foundational models that I might want to use. And I select the input document as the kind of input here to this question, which is, here is a tenancy agreement, who is the tenant? Very simple. And when I ask, a model to do this, I'm going to change it to GPT-4 Omni. And what I can do then is recompute these fields. And you can see that basically it's going to go down and calculate all of these outputs in a row. So moving on from that, and you can see these populate quite quickly. I can also do this with things like the service charge. Again, a very simple question. And to generate a new extraction, what I do is I go in here and I select a type, in this case, text. I make sure that I'm using an AI model. Maybe this time I use Claude 3.5. And maybe I'm interested in the rent. So what is the rent in this lease agreement would be something that I might type. And I can then just go through, select the input document. And again, I'm going to get all of these results populating kind of live. One thing to note here, which is really important, is that this probably will be integrated into your knowledge management system, right? The store of your data, which actually you then use as a business kind of day to day. And this data is not very standardized. Some of it says 45,000, some of it says per annum. Some of it has even more text here that we don't necessarily want to have in our, final report. So V7 will work with you generally to construct a set of best practices on prompting. One of the simplest things that we can do is just set a standard for the output example. And we can do that again in natural language. So I can just type format the result as follows. Symbol plus numerical value is a good way to do this. E.g., pound 65,000. And then when I recompute this, ignoring the spelling mistake there, what it will do is it will format these in a more consistent way. Generally, the kind of final thing that we can do with this is turn on a citation mark, right? So if I was more interested in understanding where in the document this actually has come from, I can turn on a citation button here. And when this calculates, we can actually snap to the part of the document where this is taken from to give some level of accountability to the LLM. We don't want to just blindly trust what it's telling us, because that can be dangerous for many obvious reasons. And this gives us a very easy way to scan the document, understand where it's come from, and a human can go through and validate this if they wanted to. One nice thing that we can do, which builds on the extraction and touches more on the more subjective things, is compliance checks. So we have a prompt here, and this is using a new tool type called collection, which is basically just a subtable within the table. Just to show you what it looks like, it's just a kind of mini table for each row. And what we're asking it to do is extract the alienation clauses that are in this commercial lease. So we're asking it to do two things. First, to extract the clause that's present in the document that relates to alienation. And then secondly, to extract whether that clause gives the landlord full consent on the tenant's ability to sublease and sublet that property. The reason we do this is that perhaps, for some reason, the client A has asked you as a law firm to understand alienation, subletting rules and rights, and to understand whether the corpus of leases that they're taking on have an undue amount of, risk in this space. So we can extract all of these, and for each, document, we're going to get a set of clauses and a set of landlord's consent requirements. And now I want to build on that. So one of the things I might want to do is compare this with existing legislation that actually relates to, these consent requirements. And I can start to do alienation compliance checks. So I'm just going to title my column here, alienation compliance, and I can use a type, again, a new type called single select, which is either going to be compliant or not compliant. And those are the two outputs the model is going to be enforced to output. And in this case, I can use the alienation clause here. I can use the landlord's consent clause, and I can also reference a piece of legislation, in this case, the Landlord and Tenant Act of 1988. And I can use that as a reference guide for the LLM to start to make a decision on whether that piece of contract language is compliant or not. So I can say, read the alienation clause, which should be at alienation clause, and the consent requirement, and let me know if each row is compliant with the legislation written in Landlord and Tenant Act 1988. So when I do this, what this is going to be doing is reading these collection items, these tables, and it's going to tell me whether each document is compliant or not compliant, which is a very simple way of getting, perhaps a second order of value from the extraction itself, rather than just taking raw data points from the document. And you can see here, if I wanted some reasoning in each document, I can see a reason as to why it's given that. And it says that, clause 9.1 is non-compliant because it allows the landlord to withhold consent in their absolute discretion, which contradicts the legislation, and so on and so forth. So this is just designed really to be a very quick fire demo of how you can construct these workflows really quickly. Everything is natural language, and only requires a small amount of technology. The bit that you may want to involve your technology teams in is connecting this to your existing infrastructure. But as a lawyer, I could go in and design this workflow from scratch to try and emulate the actual work that an attorney or a paralegal would be doing when reviewing this sort of data. And then when I have populated my template, my matrix, if you like, with all the questions that I would want to ask when I'm doing my due diligence, I get something like this. And if I was to add a whole new set of data here, and I'm just going to populate this with a bunch of new documents, you can see how quickly it can populate with new data. So if I go down, sorry, it's just loading there, you can see that all of this new data is just going to populate almost in real time. This should take no more than a minute to populate. And so running 1,000 of these processes in parallel is going to be drastically quicker than doing this by hand. So that's a very quick overall summary. When this is finished, you are able to download this as an Excel document. So if you wanted to go and do some more tabular analysis in another software, in BI or in Excel, you can do so. And what you might get out of it at the end is something like this, which is just a very tabular view of what we were looking at, where you can filter through, sort through, and get a bit more granular. So if in your report, you needed to understand what the total amount of rent was and the total amount of service charge across this corpus of documents, you can do so very easily through that export. That is V7 Go in a nutshell. And that is how you go in and you create these workflows to, start to emulate actual business processes using just simple natural language and LLMs, as well as some kind of guardrailing to ensure that everything is consistent with the data format that you want. That is Go. So thank you for listening. Patrick, I don't know if you have any summary points there, just to
all good.
All good.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
That's
Richard.
great. Thanks, Will and Patrick. Okay, some questions which popped to my mind watching this. How do you know, as a lawyer, how do you know which of those models to use? Because you've got a great choice there, which is very, very helpful. But how do you know which one? I mean, are you encouraging people to just have a go at different ones and see which one, is best?
Yeah, so I can take this one. Generally, any sort of LLM-based extraction, there is some amount of experimentation that goes on, and that's experimentation, as you mentioned, with the models, but also with the prompts. Generally, the level that we're at, we'll say use GPT-4o or 3.5 Sonnet are our preferred models, or Gemini if you have large numbers of tokens. So those would be our recommendations if you want the highest performance. But from my perspective as a solutions engineer, sort of working on these problems every day, it's much more the prompt that matters than the actual LLM that you're using if you're using one of these foundation models. And it's not only the prompts, but also just the way in general that you break down the problem. If you just try and get the answer out like first time and just say, does this document conform with the Rent Act of 1988 or whatever, you're generally going to get worse results there. Instead, what you have to do is really put yourself in like both a human's hands or a human's shoes when performing this, and sort of how I would break down that problem, and then try and like communicate that as well as possible to the LM through your prompting and breaking down the problem.
Just to add as well, there's a nuance to all of this, which is that often, some companies will have agreements with Azure or with Google or with AWS, and they may have a preference either commercially or from a kind of obligation standpoint to use a specific LLM. V7 allows you to actually use your own LLM instances. So if you have an API key from your Azure service account that you have to use for whatever reason or want to use, you can also just plug that in so that V7 doesn't do the processing, using our own LLM providers. So many of the customers that we work with who are in this kind of professional services space will have separate agreements with the hyperscalers. And so, if there's a preference for that, we can just plug that model into Go. So all the processing happens through your own instance.
Interesting. And if somebody wants to get hold of this, I mean, how do they do it? I mean, I suppose it's a little bit different to, you might say, a traditional point solution from a legal tech company. How, a lawyer's watching this, they say, that looks very interesting. I would like to bring this into my firm. How would they go about that?
So we find that there's kind of two groups of users. There are the users who are lawyers who want to use this for smaller projects day to day, and for them to get started, they can just contact us or sign up to the plan on the web. It's very easy to just get started, without contacting one of us. But if you want, we're more than happy to sit there and provide some assistance or some holistic feedback about the ideas that you have. There's a second group of users, the innovation teams, the R&D teams who sit in law firms as a centralized kind of set of functions and capabilities that deliver, problem-solving capabilities outside to other service lines. Those teams, we're more than happy again to, I think, spend a lot of time working out what the most optimal delivery mechanism is. Not all lawyers want to use generative AI. And some want to use it, but they don't want to configure it. If you have the ability to do kind of one-to-many delivery through, a centralized team, I think the effect of V7 Go becomes, pretty massive, because you can deliver a workflow or a template to multiple project lines that are running similar work. The more documents that you have that are, following a similar template, the more value you get out of building one workflow. Because it can do the same task in a minute. If you have 10,000 documents, compared to 5, there's obviously a lot more value in that. So it depends on the kind of structure of the work. If you have lots of project-based deliverables, this is particularly useful because you can see how quickly I could spin something up. And if there's a tight, delivery deadline, then this will, perhaps alleviate some of those concerns. But if you just want to use it on a kind of one, day-to-day basis, that's also completely fine. And our free plan is probably there for you to do that.
Gotcha. One other question in terms of the use cases. I mean, this was very much focused around contract analysis or document analysis. I mean, can you stretch that into many other areas? I mean, how broad of a range of use cases?
Yeah. So I think to an earlier point you made around like us not being a traditional legal tech tool, I think that is probably very, easily uncovered when the breadth of use cases that we work on is kind of more deeply talked about. So the portfolio of customers that we work on, cover financial services, manufacturing teams, law teams, in-house law teams, in-house finance teams, because it's very agnostic to a specific process. The very basic V7 Go environment is just an empty table with no AI in it and no documents in it. So if you have a corpus of documents and you need to understand that corpus of documents, it doesn't really necessarily matter what the content of that document is, what the document process is, to an extent, how many of those documents exist. It's very agnostic. And so I would position us kind of as a legal aid in that it can boost the productivity of legal teams, but it is not necessarily just a legal tool which only deals with contracts or only deals with lease agreements. It's very much more agnostic to any document, basically.
So, I mean, just as an example, if you were involved in a piece of litigation and there was a ton of, let's say, testimony documents, or it was some type of, perhaps not e-discovery, because that would involve hundreds of thousands of documents, but there was a large corpus of documents, that could work as well. It doesn't have to be a transactional use case.
No. So we work with a lot of teams doing, M&A, both on the buy side, the sell side, and the legal side. And often, I think a lot of the documents that we see, I say documents, are often just emails, transcripts of calls, things like that, which are less, I have a agreement or a contract. And people are trying to understand, what is the overall appetite for a deal, or what is this company actually providing? And that essence of what that is very much more subjective and holistic. And, you can definitely process things like emails or MP3 recordings of transcripts or call recordings or whatever you want through this as well, to try and extract insight from even less structured data than these lease agreements.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's all we've got time for, but if people would like to know more, how can they get hold of you?
So my email is will@v7labs.com. Our website domain is v7labs.com. So if you want to contact either me or just visit our website, you can do so using that domain and that email address.
Fantastic. Thanks, Will. Thanks, Patrick. And I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot more about V7 in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Thanks, Richard.